I want to state it categorically. White presence in South Africa contributed nothing to the economic status of blacks in South Africa. Nothing. The whites there are settlers before they were both colonized along with the blacks. And if a minority of foreign settlers that have nothing in common with you just took a land and settled way before it became South Africa. So when they arrived, there was no South Africa. 84.7 of 12 different tribes of different talents and abilities. If you say the economy is not being dispersed, to be dispersed from who to who?
You know, I don't think that is. See, that's looking at it from the finish. The beginning of it is where the answer is.
If they had a system, Ubuntu, as you're saying, why didn't they, the 49 to 50 million blacks, just cut off and then use Ubuntu to prove that they can also develop on their own? What happened to Ubuntu?
They weren't left alone.
What happened?
Apartheid happened.
No, let me explain apartheid to them.
Guys, so this is another really powerful discussion between Franck Zanu and this Rastafarian. You know, Franck Zanu speaks a lot about the definition of a culture, and he gives the example of Rastafarians. He speaks about how culture is a representative of a worldview. I know we've actually been, you know, many of us in academia, we've used the definition of culture as being a way of life, values, music, and all that. But that caused a rift the last time Franck Zanu had a discussion with these foundational African Americans, FBAs, or foundational Black Americans, where they argued that Black American culture was comprised of the music, the different forms of art that Black Americans have had to put together by reason of their long struggle in the United States of America. Franck Zanu thinks that that's not a culture to him, because he struggles to understand what you mean by Black American culture. It's like saying Nigerian culture. I'm Nigerian, for example, but I'm ethnically Igbo. So when you speak about a Nigerian culture, Nigeria has over 400 different tribes who have 400 different cosmologies and worldviews and ways of seeing the universe, right? So when you speak about a Nigerian culture, you confuse, for example, an Igbo child who was born Igbo. But when you now speak about an Igbo culture, then that child is able to understand, okay, now you're speaking about the way my people or my ancestors view the world, how they've defined relationship, marriage, taboo, sacrilege, and all that. So Franck Zanu had a problem with that terminology, Black American culture. But he really gives the example of the Rastafarians, because the Rastafarians have a certain worldview that makes them what they are, the Rastafarians, all right? So in Franck Zanu's discussion with this Rastafarian here, really powerful discussion, guys. I'm not going to spill so much of the beans, but you know, many times this Rastafarian tried to argue, especially with the case of South Africa, where Franck Zanu argued that South Africa is composed of 84.7% of a majority, right? 84.7% of the blacks, where he argues that they were waiting. This 84.7% blacks had different talents, different skills, different, armed with different kinds of propensities to create, but somehow they weren't able to create a nation or build a nation state. All right. So the minority now, for example, which are actually many people have called the white South Africans, the Afrikaners, as it were, he argues that, they were settlers. They were white settlers who arrived South Africa and then somehow built the nation, because we know that the Afrikaners took power from the British in 1948. And from 1948 all the way to 1994, when Nelson Mandela took power, the Afrikaners ruled. And within this period, many analysts have argued that from 48 to 94, that's when we saw the state build many state-owned enterprises, SOEs, as it were, Danel, ESCOM. These are state-owned enterprises that powered the nation, as it were, which many people now argue that when it was handed over to the ANC, many of those enterprises are now breaking down left, right, and center. Franck Zanu says he was there in South Africa to speak. Many things are breaking down, the railway, the train stations, and all that. So many times he argues that this minority, in a way, which built up the country, made up, I think probably, did he say 7 or 8%? I'm not yet sure. But the Rastafarian argued, right, that it wasn't necessarily because of the fact that the minority had to build for the majority, 84.7%, had to wait for a minority to build a nation. But it was the fact that the minority always has an access that this majority doesn't have. So this is the argument now of the Rastafarian, to which I really don't know if I agree fully well. But many times he argues that in terms of Franck Zanu tries to bring that argument to the United States, arguing that he has never seen where a majority waits for a minority to build a country. And the Rastafarian argued that in the US it's the case that there's a minority, which necessarily might not be black, but he argues that the minority now is or white. He argues that the minority now is a few rich, oligarchs, so to speak, while a majority poor. And so that those oligarchs, because of the fact that they have control and access over a large amount of wealth, they constantly seem to make decisions in terms of building the country, while this majority always has to wait. So in other words, that's the way he was able to interpret Franck Zanu's discussion, of which Franck Zanu didn't agree in normal Franck Zanu style. And it was a really healthy discussion, but really intense. And I think it's really important to really understand, because I'm suspecting, and if I'm hearing this conversation correctly, it still brings back this boogeyman argument on we have to blame something. We have to blame access. We have to blame lack of opportunity to build ourselves. But how far does that argument go? How far do black people have to keep on holding on to that argument for their inability to create structure, organize? There's a place in Nigeria, it's called Lagos, right? And this place in Lagos is called Makoko. It's an island that's actually where people live, they give birth, they eat, all that on water. All right, it's crazy. Now it's been demolished. Many people who have lived there for hundreds of years do not know where to go and all that. Franck Zanu is actually, many times he has actually used that example of how it is that many leaders on the continent allow themselves to have such settlements exist within their countries. He argues that it's because of the fact that their brains, right, or their minds have not been able to get to the point where they reject these kinds of limitational ways of living. And so that's why we are able to see a lot of slums, a lot of poor places and all that across the continent. This is according to Franck Zanu, but that, the whole thing about constantly blaming access, for example, in Lagos, for example, where we have this kind of slums and all that, in the same Lagos, you find a lot of black people, wealthy. In fact, I think number one richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote, is actually from Nigeria. There are people with wealth, all right? But at the end of the day, we still see a lot of slums and all that. It's really difficult to then always argue from the perspective that black people do not have certain access to things, and that's why their areas or their regions are not developed. And it was a really powerful discussion. I don't really want to spill all the beans, but let's quickly listen to this Rastafarian and Franck Zanu still argue the case, especially using South Africa as an example, on how it is that a majority and a minority coexisted and were colonized at the same time. Because we must remember that the Afrikaners were also colonized by the British, as the British also colonized the black people with the 1913 Native Lands Act, where many people have argued that this was the period when a lot of the land was taken from the black people, all right? But the Afrikaners as well, it's actually really interesting for me that the British colonized both of them the same time, as well as the Indians. But for some reason, ever since 1994, it appears that the whites and the Indians still have always thumped above the blacks and the coloreds. And this boogeyman mentality, I suspect, is what Franck Zanu is trying to break down and try to really encourage black people, colored people, across the diaspora even to stand up and slowly start understanding the condition they find themselves, and not necessarily always blaming a boogeyman. But let's quickly listen to this Rastafarian and Franck Zanu dig in on the problem and share your thoughts in the comments.
But what I'm saying, the history of South Africa is different from that of the United States of America. The whites there are settlers before they were both colonized along with the blacks. And if a minority of foreign settlers that have nothing in common with you just took a land and settled way before it became South Africa. So when they arrived, there was no South Africa. 84.7 of 12 different tribes of different talents and abilities. If you say the economy is not being dispersed, to be dispersed from who to who? And why should the whites disperse the economy?
No, I don't think that is. See, that's the that's looking at it from the finish. The beginning of it is where the answer is. I believe.
Sure. Yeah. Why
The
would
beginning
they,
of it is
the settler who has
how-
come from his house
Right.
with a handbag?
How did he get the ability, access to that type of wealth? Is it because when he got there, he got on a horse and marked the land, and then rode the horse till he was tired, and then marked that land, and that became his land? That is now his great-great-grandson's land? Is that why? I think that has if you can't find the equivalent where there's a black South African whose great-great-great-grandfather left him that same land, then right away you begin to see the imbalance, not at the finish of it, but at the beginning of it, how the thing started. You have access to not only to wealth, but to an infrastructure that was designed for you.
By who?
By your ancestors, by the settlers.
Well, that is what I'm saying. So what I'm asking you is the 84.7% of the population who have lived on that land for thousands of years before this foreigner showed up only 450 to 500 years ago. How come they did not build that wealth?
Because that wasn't their structure.
What was their structure?
Their structure was Ubuntu. I am because we are.
Okay then.
So what if they went back? What if they went back? Could the white settlers survive in that system? No, they destroyed it.
No. If they had a system, Ubuntu, as you're saying, why didn't they, the 49 to 50 million blacks, just cut off and then use Ubuntu to prove that they can also develop on their own? What happened to Ubuntu?
They weren't left alone.
What happened?
Apartheid happened.
No. Let me explain apartheid to those who may not know the real background of apartheid. The word is an English word or Dutch word that just became Afrikaan. Simply saying, well, this is the majority. We would like to keep our culture and leave our little area. In fact, the whites were putting more pressure on themselves to say, we can exist in this little corner here by ourselves. We don't want intermingle of race, religion. That's it. Do you know that apartheid, in terms of living separate, has always been there? It became a problem because somebody thought it was a good idea to ask the parliament to put it into law. That was what ignited the fight against it. But the structure itself was there for over hundreds of years.
Just
so
like
my
here.
question to you is this. If the whites were apartheid, which is, look, we will live in our small corner. They are confident enough to say, even though we are minority, we can survive. Why didn't the majority say, okay, go on with your apartheid, we'll go with our Ubuntu, and then build a black South Africa on their own community? Apartheid didn't say you can exist, no.
So apartheid didn't stop that?
No.
Apartheid supported that.
It's supposed actually enabling you to go on and be Ubuntu. Leave us alone.
So the South Africa, even before it was made legislative law, you're saying that the white people in South Africa supported black people going off on their own and doing their own thing?
When you say supported, they didn't have to support or not support.
No,
you were existing before we arrived. Apartheid doesn't mean that white people were telling blacks, you're not going to live on this land. No, absolutely not. It simply means the place we took, we would just keep it and live there, just like Greenwich.
And if you stay there, and if you're a black person, and your family is from that area that we took, then you have to live under our laws now.
No, there was nothing like that. They could build a ship rest stop, where the initial plan was to have a place where ships going out to Asia could stop and refuel and do all that. So you must understand that they pick a place that was barren.
Coastal. That's why
just
most of
the
the
same way Orania is doing today. They took a bare land. They bought a bare land from the government. The same thing, they saw a bare land because there was no country. There was no country. That is what people seem to forget. You must understand, the Zulus were the most populated, most powerful, and they were waging war on all the small tribes in the area. That was what the game was. Before these people came, found a place and said,
same thing with the Caribbean.
Right.
This is what they do.
So how can somebody continue to insist that 84.7% of a population should rather rely on just a 6% that arrive, they don't even know the terrain?
My position is not anything about rely. My position is, when do you add the mindset of the settlers who run South Africa for so many years, and the conscious efforts they made to hold black folks down.
Explain how they held them down.
With apartheid, brethren.
No,
Once it became law, so let's talk about a place that I've been for 45 years. America had apartheid. It was called Jim Crow.
Okay.
You can literally take one thing and put them on top of it. It's the same exact thing.
Okay.
So the mentality, the mindset, what D.W. Griffith injected with the birth of a nation that the president showed in the White House and called it the blazing fire, where we see the Ku Klux Klan invented for the first time as a weapon. None of that had a role in where black folks are in this country now.
We are talking about South Africa.
No,
I'll come back here and explain this place. We're talking about South Africa, and I think it's an important topic. It might ignite in the minds of other Africans and even African Americans here and in the UK to understand that there is something deeper than what we are talking about. I want to state it categorically. White presence in South Africa contributed nothing to the economic status of blacks in South Africa. Nothing. Because I would ask you then, show me outside South Africa, the remaining 53 countries where there is no apartheid, which one has developed to what it wants to be? If apartheid caused black South Africans to have a low economic status, then I need someone to show me the remaining 53 countries in the continent which has no apartheid.
So what did those countries have? Nothing.
You went to Nigeria.
They didn't have anything.
No.
It was called colonialism and then imperialism.
Exactly. So hold on there. I'll share something with you. I'll share something with you. So, neocolonialism is a new term used in Africa. Everyone is using it. All the other countries that were colonized, none, Asia, Middle East, Eastern Europe, colonized. None today uses the word colonialism ever did anything to us. See, we are not able to explain what caused a whole race, 54 in a continent, that they all have a uniform problem as it is. If you cannot explain it, you got to find something to use to say it might be this or that.